Hello, my name is Geoffreyjen Edwards, and I'm the originator and author behind this event, which, however, involves a whole team of people to put into place. So we hope you're going to enjoy our presentation. It promises to be an interesting one. So we're going to start with Jocelyne with the music, and I'll explain as we move forward. So this first belt is first belt, represents the moon. Our model today is Cyril Schneider, who's a neurologist, who's doubling as a model today for us for the event. So it's the surface of the moon. The belt serves as an anchor for the augmented reality image that you see added on top of it. And I'm going to read an excerpt that describes a scene from this part of the book in relation to the images that you're looking at. The yard was not a space platform like the annex, but rather an extensive architecture constructed around a small moonlet. The rock, as its residents named it, was some 50 kilometers in diameter. Naively, one would have expected vertical structures pinned onto the rock, but the yard was structured horizontally rather than vertically. Instead of spires, it consisted of folded sheets through which poked a large rounded section of the rock. It had slightly more gravity than a true null G environment, but objects still settled quickly enough to notice. If you left things floating, they drifted downwards at a stately pace, but the oblique angle of the sheets often made the downwards direction something other than the apparent vertical. As they approached, the form slowed and turned, and a startled Vanu realized this was a Jonah, another of the ancient deep-sea creatures of old Earth that had been adapted to function in the spaces between the stars. The Jonahs were once a creature called a whale, whose intelligence had been enhanced. The magnificent creature drifted delicately up to the platform. The Jonah's movements appeared graceful and slow. So a word about the belts. These are constructed by our weaver, in-house weaver, Dominique Michaud, who made them using a technique called ikat. Essentially, each thread was painted before the weaving took place in order to generate these complex patterns on the belt. So it's an enormous amount of effort and calculation to get this right when the belt is constructed. This was needed in order to generate forms that provided sufficient contrast that could be recognized by the software when a phone, in this case, is brought close enough for the recognition to occur, and then the augmented reality is added. Here we have a scene from the sun with a space platform floating above the sun. Vanu boarded the flyer and piloted across the short distance to the access port for the wellhead. This was an egg-like structure which looked to be tethered to the star by a gossamer thread that dropped away beneath it. The construction looked ungainly, a beached whale thrown up by the seas it served, although Vanu had to dampen the brightness of her visual field to even perceive it properly. Vanu also had a momentary thought about what the wellhead represented. It was like a guardian or a gatekeeper, a Saint Peter at the pearly gates, not just to support those who went down into the star, but also to screen out the unworthy. Sorry, a small glitch in the proceedings. For the next belt, we will use the same belt as the previous one, but we're going to show an image that is the space platform within which most of the novel takes place. Our model for this scene is Mary Thaler, who's a writer friend of mine, so you can see the surface of the sun in the belt that she's wearing. And the music is done by another friend and colleague of mine, Jocelyne, who developed the original music as background for each of these pieces. Vanu welcomed the solitude. She never got enough time on her own. Her mind teemed with questions, but without answers, no matter how much she dwelt on them. She kept hoping God would intervene and save her from the throngs within, but God didn't seem to be listening. Of course, wasn't suffering an integral part of her spiritual journey? There were times she thought she understood what that might meant. Unfortunately, such moments turned and fled when noticed, minnows flashing into the dark. Vanu was looking up, away from the platform, and towards the nebula itself, as might a creature of the deep stare toward the distant lights of the surface. The pastel ceiling was intercut with dark bands and splashes of vari-colored luminosity, violets, pinks, and yellows, shapes that echoed her inner turmoil, the fires of space frozen in time. Lashed to the extended flat platform, on both sides of where her magsoles clamped her in place, were machines, behemoths from an antique era. Her magsoles soundlessly clamped and unclamped from the metallic surface in a timed dance as she shifted her feet in place, restless as usual. The platform gave the appearance of a vast institute lying on the floor of some sea, but of course the annex was free floating in space, a different kind of ocean. So the 3D animations are done by another colleague, a student of mine, Jonathan Proulx Guimond. We'll see later, he also did the cover art for the novel, which has just been published, and on which this exercise is based. So this next belt is a little different from the others. The others represent space platforms of one sort or another. This one, the characters in the novel wear a kind of body suit in which textures move dynamically across the surface. And so we thought we would use the augmented reality possibilities to simulate or emulate this kind of textile on the body. So it's a fractal image that we have rendered dynamic on the surface of the body. Jocelyne met her at the main entrance near the top of the cube. She was wearing another interesting brand, but more subdued than the one she had worn when bent on romancing Vanu. This had slowly changing fractal patterns moving across her body, white and black, the Mandelbrot set, Vanu guessed. Vanu had reservations about the encounter. She really didn't want to publicize their relationship, for that was indeed what it was becoming. She wanted it kept private and personal and secret. But she understood that Josie didn't have a secretive nature. that she was used to doing things in the open, and Vanu didn't want to change her in any way. With her was a great bear of a man, not a mastodon, just a large, well-muscled Indiv with the same dark skin as Jocelyne, bright blue eyes, a beaming smile, and even tufts of hair along the sides of his massive head. "I'm so pleased to meet you, Kinla Vanu. My daughter thinks very highly of you. Come on in." "I'm not actually a Kinla, Maestre," Vanu hastened to explain. "I won't be until I achieve maturation status. Until then, I am only a novice. You should call me just plain Vanu." "And you shall call me Great Bear." I know. I do look the part. How my parents knew what I would look like as an adult, nobody yet has been able to explain to me." And for the final sequence, both models are going to come out again, showing the 4 belts. The 3, you saw 3 in the earlier part of the presentation, but in fact there was a 4th belt that was created for the platform sequence, but the contrast in the belt wasn't strong enough to support the technical aspects. So we replaced it with the second use of the sun motif for the technical part of the show. But the belt is worth looking at. It's the prettiest of the 4. So. Cosmos requires the small, not the large. We listen to the foam. It's popping, crackling, rustling, slithering, sighing, the way it gathers and disperses. Ours is the slowness, the settling in. Space-time itself speaks to us and for us, but to listen, we must enter the slowness. Furthermore, stories are not meant to be hermetically sealed. They escape around the edges. So do not look for closure. History is not about certainty, even if it is primarily concerned with the past. There are gaps in our knowledge, and stories, as distinct from histories, carry their own unravelings. So that's the end of the main sequence. I would like to finish up by thanking everybody who was part and parcel of the whole thing. Our two models here, Mary Thaler and Cyril Schneider. As I mentioned earlier, Mary is a writer, and I put a link in the YouTube webpage to her own site that lists her work. I'd like to thank Ernesto, who was kind enough to act as our mobile cameraman for the augmented reality today. Ernesto is also a researcher and a colleague and a friend. Jonathan Caron-Roberge, who's the programmer who did this extensive software to make all this happen. So it took us about 3 years of work to get to this point. Dominique Michaud, who is the weaver who put together these belts. As I mentioned earlier, it's this unusual technique that it's quite demanding in order to get these contrasting motifs. Jonathan Proulx Guimond, who's not here today, but he did the 3D animations that are shown in the augmented reality sequences. And he's also the artist who did the cover art of my book, so a very talented artist. Alexandre and Christelle Nadeau, who are our video camera people for this exercise today and have taken care of all the streaming issues to make this work. Lighting, microphone, sound, all the rest, so it's been an extensive effort. Jocelyne Kiss, who did the music for each of these sequences. Kind of a mashup. Well, anyway, I did try to understand how she did it, but I think they're very interesting pieces. I also want to highlight Alain Leblond, who is the host. He made available his own gallery space in his own home for us for this event. His gorgeous images are all around on the walls, so it is quite a remarkable space to hold an event of this kind. I put a link to his Facebook page on the YouTube website because his work is for sale. It's quite expensive, but there may be people who are interested in that kind of purchase and can contact Alain directly for that. And myself, I'm Geoffreyjen Edwards. I am the author of this book, from which I read excerpts. The book is called Plenum, the First Book of Deo. It was published and released last Tuesday, so it's still warmer to hold in my hands. And as I mentioned, Jonathan Proulx Guimond also did the cover art for this book. So I could also thank my publishers, Untimely Books, Marco Morelli and Kayla Morelli, who designed also the book and did a lot of the work. Mary was an editor on the book as well, so it's a very collaborative environment to do this kind of thing. So we're going to finish the show there, but we're going to keep the cameras rolling a little bit longer. We're going to open some champagne so that we can celebrate the launch of the book and the completion of this exercise. And I'll have a look at see whether or not there are any comments on the chat. Usually I like to look at the chat, so but I couldn't be in all places at once today to do that work. Thank you, everyone.
So do you want to start the live stream?
You can start the light. Puis si tu peux laisser en wide angle pour le...
It's in wide angle, but it's in wide angle this way, so we don't see the screen.
Ok, c'est pas mal. Les gens
S'il y a des gens qui doivent quitter rapidement, je prendrai comme quelques images des gens qui veulent quitter tout de suite, puis après ça, Sinon, à tour de rôle, si vous pouviez les placer juste devant la bouche, j'aimerais ça comme avoir toutes vos images, toutes vos personnes pour les remerciements et les rajouter à la vidéo ensuite. Fait qu'un à la fois. Un à la fois? Ouais, à la fois. En fait, devant les caméras, c'est écrit comme ça.
Bravo. C'est très bon.
Tu peux me regarder.
C'est passé.
Comment? Tu peux me regarder. Okay. Maintenant, si ça ne dérange pas de marcher vers moi. C'est bon, merci.
Ensemble. Même moment. Son garçon était à Brébeuf, en musique, pendant que ma fille était là. Ils ont le même âge.
Vous devez être dans la même promotion.
Ah oui, tout à fait. Tout à fait. C'est amusant.
Monsieur Lebissard, dans le tour, si ça vous dérange pas.
Moi?
Oui, vous avez fait partie de la journée d'activité.
Tu vas me prendre où, là?
Vous avez placé devant l'écran blanc.
OK.
Vous pourriez même vous mettre en coin avec vos ailes, en fait, ça serait vraiment bien.
Avec plaisir, comme tu veux.
Vous pouvez sourire, ça va être sur la vidéo enregistrée. Juste une dernière chose. Oui, c'est ça. Parfait, merci beaucoup.
Plaisir.
Next.
C'est bon. Écoute, ça ne donne rien ce que je veux dire, mais je fais affaire avec quelqu'un qui est graphique. Il a la même tête que toi, sauf qu'il a une tête plus basse.
Regardez donc, mais bon encore.
Même à l'autre, en même temps, c'est bon.
Parfait, merci beaucoup.
Next.
Parlez donc, merci. Oui. Merci beaucoup. Il manque toutes les dames et Monsieur Edwards. Jocelyne, il faut que tu aies fait ton first look. Ton first shooting. Je t'attends. Tu peux mettre devant, en fond, les toilettes qui sont là, t'enlever ton masque.
Le logiciel à interpréter, c'est tâché.
Vous laissez le masque sur la table.
Pour faire apparaître le
Pour pas la prendre je peux pas, je la garde. Mais merci quand même.
C'est bon, merci beaucoup.
J'ai un bébé de 5 mois.
Oh, quelle santé!
C'est impossible de passer.
Il y a un commentaire qui dit can someone introduce the people being shown, speak with them, and can the camera follow the action rather than the spelling?
Ils veulent quoi?
Est-ce que tu regardes peut-être de prendre la caméra qui est là? Oui.
Ah, puis de la tournée?
Oui, puis de regarder le monde, puis de présenter le monde, puis savoir si c'est
En fait, il faudrait que le monde s'en
Ben, ça, si les gens s'en allaient devant le point, ils tous ici. Parce que le problème, c'est que j'aurais pas l'éclairage pour déjà que j'avais donné. J'avais jamais un carrelage d'éclairage.
Monsieur
In fact, if everybody would like to present themselves to the camera, you should be in front of this panel here, so the lighting is better. Because that way we only see comme black spots running
Okay.
around.
Should all of us move to disagree?
Ouais,
Parce que
un peu ensemble.
il y a
Ça va,
des
toi.
personnes, des spectateurs qui aimeraient ça savoir qui est qui.
Ah, donc, Geoffrey va présenter tout le monde.
On se met tout là?
Yes,
Ouais,
you can,
ouais.
oui, vous pouvez tout être ici en fait, là, puis le micro, il vous capte tous, fait que vous pouvez tous vous
Someone made
présenter
the
ici.
comment that they want you to introduce people and know who they are exactly.
Okay. Hello. This is Mary Taylor,
Hi.
and Dominique Michaud next to her, and Alain Leblond, who's the host with the artist who did all these magnificent images. They're digital images. Jonathan, Jonathan Caron-Roberge, who's the programmer.
Squeeze it.
Cyril.
Cette ligne-là, à partir d'ici, je fais le plus. Fait qu'on
Ok.
peut passer
Oh,
cette
ok.
ligne-là.
Bon, j'ai même pas besoin de m'accroupir, elle était dans mon grand.
Bon, j'essaie de tout salon, ça peut être.
Elles sont fatiguées, Jocelyne.
Non, non, elle était à l'extérieur.
T'es à l'extérieur.
Oh, voilà, c'est vous.
The people in the chat who you're talking to are in this camera.
Okay. This is Cyril Schneider, Jocelyne Kiss, and Ernesto Morales. Jocelyne is the musician. Ernesto was our mobile cameraman. Cyril, you are recognized as the model. And and we're missing Jonathan Proulx Guimond, who's the 3D animation artist.
Is it okay for the chat?
The other comment is show the artwork on the walls.
Oh,
The artwork,
yeah.
I can show this. No problem.
On peut-
C'est ça que moi, je
I didn't understand the chat is one.
Les gens s'appellent.
I didn't understand because it's streaming.
Live stream.
Non, oh boy, c'est terrible. Ah, là.
Ça m'intéresse.
Yeah. Vous présenter les œuvres,
Je
vous
peux pas faire
entendez?
ça. Je peux pas faire ça.
Il y a une façon de
Ben,
faire.
si on peut en français, c'est
Contrôle
super.
A, contrôle C, contrôle D.
Moi, je pense qu'on peut le faire en français pour vrai.
Québec, qu'est-ce que tu veux que...
We can always put closed captioning underneath.
Là, en fait, je vais te demander de te déplacer surtout parce que la caméra ne peut pas bouger beaucoup. Mais si j'ai les œuvres avec lesquelles tu veux parler surtout, moi, ça me va, je suis capable de les cadrer assez facilement de ici.
En fait, je pense que les gens voulaient surtout voir les œuvres une par une, ce qui ne semble pas possible. Donc, c'est un procédé de création 3D. Je crée tous les objets en 3D, les textures, les éclairages,
Je vais demander un pas de côté, un pas derrière.
les mises en scène,
Ensuite, on va aller devant le micro.
comme ça.
Ouais, exactement.
Est-ce que ça fonctionnait, là? Oui.
Ouais, là, ça fonctionne.
Oui. Là, ça fonctionne, je recommence?
Ouais, je pense que ça fonctionnait avant, ça peut
Ok.
assurer une meilleure qualité là.
Donc, c'est ça. C'est des scènes qui sont créées dans un monde 3D virtuel et puis qui ensuite sont simplement imprimées avec des encres UV sur des panneaux d'aluminium. Et ça donne des œuvres de grand format comme ça, 4 pieds par 4 pieds, 3 pieds par 6 pieds. Donc, vous êtes le bienvenu d'aller sur ma page Facebook et puis faire vos commentaires ou me poser des questions. Merci.
Ça va, après ça, il faut des commentaires?
Non, c'était pas ça comment, c'était Andrea Van de
C'était live.
The friend of Andrea, she put the comment.
Oh, Andrea.
C'est des fournis, ça, c'est des vacances. Des fournis. Comme
c'est comme c'est genre de c'est le nom pour ça en anglais, c'est comme un petit gâteau au chocolat.
Okay, I
Mais
think we did.
souvent plus riche et plus dense qu'un gâteau.
je ne veux pas le prendre un baking powder ou le truc.
Oui, c'est ça.
Ouais,
Alors,
je suis bien, je vous ai pas passé encore à la caméra.
ben, qu'est-ce que tu veux que je fasse?
Juste déposer votre verre, je veux juste faire, juste vous prendre à la caméra, c'est pas super compliqué.
Tu veux que je sois où?
juste en avant des arts de l'art ici. Je trouve ça vraiment beau comme background. Je laisse ça.
Hi. So what?
Juste comme ça, c'est beau. C'est pour
Line
les
up.
remerciements en fait, dans le fond.
Join the line.
Parfait, merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Là, il manque juste mademoiselle ici, Michaud. Je pense que j'ai fait le tour après ça. Il va rester M. Edwards que j'aimerais savoir longtemps aussi.
C'est important. C'est très bon, ces deux, là.
Ouais, on a de masque. Tu peux nous poser la petite table en arrière, on la voit.
Pick them.
Juste une vidéo ou une
Pick the
C'est des
brightest
vidéos
one.
sont faites, mais on a déjà un peu une photo parce que c'est juste un plan de vidéo.
Which is weird, because no natural food is food.
No.
C'est bon,
But
c'est
maybe that's what
parfait.
we could do.
I'm just curious.
Et c'est à vous, M. Edwards.
Wow.
C'est avant qu'il a fallu que tu sois au moins. Ça a tout été emballé individuellement par quelqu'un qui avait la COVID.
Là, on rentrait avec le microbe dedans.
Ouais, bien sûr.
C'est bon.
Ouais, mais le microbe s'est étouffé. Dans le papier.
Je me suis choquée.
Ouais.
Pas d'air.
Merci.
J'espère que je vous ai pas choqué, j'ai été délinquant tout le long, moi, sans
Merci.
Non, pour vrai, après ça, si jamais vous voulez faire des entrevues, pour ajouter dans les entrevues, moi je serais prêt à filmer, ou ça serait sur la chaise sur laquelle vous avez fait votre live, on pourrait faire les entrevues à partir de là. Ça, c'est à votre discrétion, je peux laisser les gens peut-être les célébrer aussi.
Aussi, tu décadrer, leur mettre en wide.
Je vais mettre en wide, et
je l'ai compris.
Je ne peut-être pas bien prononcer.
Mais on pourrait faire un entrevue.
un entrevue.
Dire le fait que j'ai une verre dans la main, ça n'empêche rien.
Non, ça n'empêche rien. Non, je te mets le cadrage
Donc une boulangerie, rue, boulevard du Bourg-en-Saint.
Mary, là, il voulait faire l'entrevue avec
Non,
moi.
l'emballage, parce que
Avec moi. Il veut que tu alimentes avec des questions.
sur les emballages.
On s'est demandé si c'était toi.
C'est pas moi. Moi, je suis.
Parce que tu as des questions.
Vraiment bonne des consignes.
Je m'excuse de servir de toi.
Ça, je vais vous cadrer de toute façon spéciale, puis vous allez pouvoir parler directement à la caméra, le micro qui va capter va être juste à côté de la caméra dans le fond.
Puis Mary va me poser des questions parce qu'elle est bonne pour une question.
Parfait.
I know how to make people talk.
Yes.
With alcohol?
Ça délie le langue, c'est certain.
Yeah.
Je me suis rappelé tout à l'heure aussi. La Romaine personne, les 60, les Romaines, 62 ans, il y avait des élèves
Est-ce qu'il faut c'est pas nécessaire le silence dans la salle ou
Pardon?
c'est pas nécessaire le silence dans la salle?
Dans ce contexte-là de l'entrevue, c'est vraiment pas nécessaire. Mon micro est suffisamment comme.
pour que scotch Geoffreyjen Edwards dans mon 50e anniversaire. Ça faisait 11 ans que j'avais la bouteille qui n'était pas ouverte.
Moi, je suis politologue, elle est traductrice.
Hein?
Oui,
Alors, moi, je fais des lives sur Twitch.
Ok, c'est parti. Fait que, dans le fond, on regarde dans la caméra ici. Si jamais vous voulez vous asseoir ici, généralement, quand on pose des questions, on a tendance à regarder notre interlocuteur. D'expérience, je pense que si vous êtes soyez mieux. Ouais, c'est ça.
Mais c'est pas de
Oui, comme ça, je peux la regarder, puis ça,
C'est exactement
c'est
ça.
l'impression.
Idéalement, on essaie de parler vers la caméra parce que ça se voit qu'on va la regarder, mais c'est pas si grave que ça si vous détournez le regard.
D'accord, oui, absolument.
Je crois que
c'est contre le voilà.
Ouais, c'est bon.
Okay.
Comment ça se passe?
So exciting! Your book's out. I think you should start by just telling us what it's about. The quick version, because I think we didn't get that yet.
No, so the book is it's about a young gender-neutral individual who lives in a religious community in the far future. It takes place 1,500 years in the future, and it's a religious community. So, and the character is struggling with issues about identity, about sexual orientation, because she lives in a community that is homo-oriented, sexually oriented, single sex, and she's attracted to somebody outside the community, and so that poses issues for her. And so it's about her struggles with understanding her position in society, and eventually it leads into issues of one of her sibs has mental health issues, and she ends up needing to engage with events that transpire and cause difficulties, that mostly as a result of her own engagements with this young woman. Okay.
Well, you're good. You're warmed up now.
I didn't feel that was very good, so.
Take it away. Oh, you tell us what.
Okay, perfect. You can go.
Okay, why don't you, you have a new book out, so why don't you tell us what it's about, the short version for people who maybe might be interested in reading it.
Right, so it's called Plenum, the First Book of Deo. It's actually the first volume of a 15-book series that I'm in the process of developing. This one deals with a young, neutral-gendered individual who is struggling with issues of identity and sexuality and faith. And so it's a kind of exploration of all those different things. It takes place in the far future, so it's kind of interesting to place religion in a context in the far future. And it deals with the sort of events that transpire because of actions that she undertakes that eventually cause fairly important consequences in her own life and those of the people who are close to her. So it's a kind of space opera, but because it takes place in spaceships and on space platforms, but it is a very human story through this. It's not militaristic or anything like that. It's very human oriented.
And it's set in the far future, and you have imagined some technologies that are just like completely transform the way people live. And we've seen today that the other discipline that you follow is also kind of pushing the boundaries of technology that transforms.
Yeah, so I'm very interested both as a scientist, because I was a scientist before I retired, and I still do some active scientific research. But I am interested in how technology changes us as people. And so the book investigates, to some extent, a massive number of very extreme technologies that completely change the way people function. And so that provides the sort of background within which this operates. So for instance, we talked about in the presentation about a bodysuit with textures that change dynamically on the surface of the person. But we also had a character who was standing outside in the vacuum. So that is made possible by some of the technology. So it's not the kind of thing that you would normally see in science fiction, because the technologies are drastic, they're radical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you see some of the things that we've been looking at today sort of unfolding in our current human?
Well, I took the tendencies that I see today, so I sort of, the whole book is based on a projection, based on the idea that one develops biotechnology and nanotechnology, and the two merge into something that I call BINAC, which is short for bio-nano. And to some extent, AI and those kinds of things, although they interest me less as a topic, even though I know that they're very common and a lot of people are interested in them, but I think AI is less interesting in the long term for all sorts of reasons. And so it's these other technologies that interest me. So they are a kind of projection into the future.
Yeah, that you've been able to explore.
Yeah,
through this novel.
yeah.
So what lies ahead for you in augmented reality, fashion and technology, and in writing? Like, what are you?
Well, this was a long effort, and I thought that naively I thought this was a 6-month project. It turned out to be a 3.5-year project. Of course, it happened in the middle of the pandemic, and so everything went to slow speed when we were doing the development work. So that's part of that. But still, it's lengthier than I originally expected. And I no longer work at the university, so I don't have the same access to funds to develop this, but I imagine I'll still be doing augmented reality for a while. I think what we've done here is quite interesting and obviously it's kind of, a book promotion inside a fashion show, which is an odd combination by any measure.
And you've got big plans for writing too, some writing already accomplished, and a lot more coming.
So I mentioned this is a 15-book saga. The 15 books exist in draft form. They're in the process of being revised. I think you're my editor on one of the books, on the second book in the series, and I'm in the process of finishing up the third book in the series. So these things are moving forward in terms of publishing.
And that means that Vanu, the main character of Plenum, First Book of Deo, we're going to see here again. Yeah, so the 15 books is 5 trilogies, and so what I'm publishing to begin with is the first books of each trilogy. And the Vanu story is taken up in the second book of Deo, but that won't be out for a couple of years because I have all these other books to publish between now and then. So we have to be patient.
You have to be patient. But you get to see the world again.
Yes.
You just don't get to see the individual characters until a certain time has passed.
We'll be seeing the Jonas.
You'll be seeing the Jonas. The Jonas are constant to come back a lot because they represent a very kind of interesting moral context for collaboration between species.
These are the whale-like creatures.
These are the whale-like creatures that we saw in the book, in the excerpts.
Fantastic.
Moi, je trouve ça bien. Absence, c'est qui voulait faire l'entrevue avec vous, qui voulait faire l'entrevue avec les autres artistes qui avaient fait des ceintures et compagnie.
What question would be interesting, will it be translated in other languages?
Well, translation is always a tricky thing. I think, so I'm working with a co-op publisher right now, and we're just learning the business. Translation is probably in the books eventually, but one would expect for books that do reasonably well, you're not going to translate a book that only has a very short distribution, but if the book does well, then I imagine that it will be eventually translated into other languages.
So if you want to see a translation, give this book to all your friends for Christmas. That's the way to make it happen.
Is there another question in the chat?
Not sustainable.
Oh. Well, it would be interesting because it is quite actually linguistically experimental.
It is book. Too, because it shifts language inside the book. So a lot of science fiction writers do this, but I thought it through very carefully. I decided to shift language only in a limited number of words, because if you do it too often, readers get completely, they lose their bearings.
Yeah, this is not quite Clockwork Orange level of innovation.
No, and I shift words slightly based on their actual changed use. And I usually shift them once, work with it for a while, until I realize that the word isn't quite working, and then I adjust it. And I do this several times, so the words have a kind of organic quality to them, even when they're shifted. And one of the reviewers for the book remarked on the fact that the shifted language is not too difficult to do, because the words feel very organic. So I seem to have done the job right for that.
Good. Vanu's story? Like, what was it? What
So,
did you see in it that you
Vanu
needed
is
to
a
have?
gender-neutral
Mhm.
individual. In my universe, I have 7. So they're called 7 genders, but I think in modern terminology, we would say 7 sexes.
Mm.
Because sex and gender are somewhat different ideas. Vanu is a gender neutral, is a neutral sex character.
Mm.
And I have a kind of a gender fluidity in my own makeup. So I'm drawn to characters that mix up the genders to some extent. And Vanu was perhaps the first one that I did with that kind of a combination.
Yeah. And she's not just seeking answers about her sexuality. There's also a spiritual aspect.
There's a spiritual aspect too. Again, an area that's rarely dealt with in science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a kind of exploration of the spiritual dimension. Even there's kind of a tension between issues like doctrine and practice. So how does a religion's doctrine sometimes not always line up with their practice? So these kinds of issues are part of what's studied in the book.
What are you excited about these days in science fiction? What,
Besides my own books?
well, starting with your own books.
Because a lot of science fiction deals with near future, so the ecological crisis that we're facing. But I'm very interested in the far future and the long-term visioning, because I think for humanity to get out of this trouble we're in now, we need to have a long view, not a short view. And so I'm interested in developing these longer views of where things could go.
There's a certain optimism in it.
I am an optimist,
Well,
fundamentally.
Maybe that's what we need. Well, okay. Is there anything else that we'd like to...
Other comments, thoughts?
So,
From the Peanut Gallery?
It's okay. So if you want to do another interview, we can do some more.
Thanks so much, Geoffreyjen. And we're waiting for the next book. Although I think as your editor, I am
I think you're the bottleneck right now.
So I'll get working on that.
That's okay. That's okay. It's a big job, and the publisher is, as you know, is engaged to do the 15 books. So it's quite a job to do that.
Buckle in.
Yeah.
That.
Good.
Mon verre de champagne est vide.
Tu cherches un autre. Peut-être.
Toi aussi, sans rire, tu demandais pas ça, c'est bon.
Je me demandais si tu voulais expliquer un peu ce que tu as fait pour les ceintures. Je peux toujours. Oui, pourquoi pas. Tant qu'être ici, là, avec le serveur et tout, là.
Ok.
Je peux poser des questions si tu veux.
C'est bon. Ok. Merci, Kadjavi.
Surtout avec le champagne.
Est-ce qu'il y a des grands?
Donc, encore une fois, je vais vous faire la même explique. On essaie autant que possible de regarder la caméra ici. Si jamais tu regardes ailleurs, c'est pas la fin du monde. Surtout si c'est moi, une fois de temps en temps, un petit check comme ça, ou si c'est un petit check sur M. Edwards, c'est pas la fin du monde. Autant que possible, on essaie de le faire là. Je sais que ça se peut que finalement tu l'oublies, tu regardes essentiellement Jeffrey, mais ça fait la job quand même.
Ok, c'est bon.
Why don't you begin by telling us who you are and what your training is to do the job that you've done for this project?
Ça dérange si je réponds en français?
Non, ok, on va aller en français.
C'est juste mon accent d'anglais est terrible. Mais mon background était quand même assez diversifié. Moi, j'ai fait un bac en mathématiques informatiques. J'avais essayé quelques études en géomatique. J'ai terminé, il n'y a pas longtemps, un DEC en métier d'art, construction textile. Puis là, présentement, je suis à la maîtrise sur mesure qui combine art, techno et santé. Donc, c'est justement parce que j'avais fait des études en géomatique que j'ai connu Geoffrey, qui avait été un des profs dans un de mes cours. Donc, Voilà. Et puis, ben, c'est lui, dans le fond, qui m'avait parlé de son projet, justement, de faire des vêtements, des textiles en réalité augmentée. Moi, je trouvais ça quand même assez intéressant comme projet. J'avais commencé à faire plusieurs tests pour voir un petit peu c'était quoi, grosso modo, les limites de la technologie, parce qu'il y a quand même plusieurs contraintes auxquelles il faut tenir compte avant de pouvoir créer quelque chose comme ça. Puis le fait que ça soit du tissu, c'était la plus grosse contrainte, c'est que le tissu, ça se déforme. Puis présentement, les logiciels de réalité augmentée aiment ça quand c'est très droit et, comment je dirais ça, carré et puis avec des gros contrastes, mais surtout que ça se déforme pas. Donc, ça a été une des premières.
On voit à partir d'ici si vous voulez les montrer.
Parfait. Donc là, c'est ça, c'était la difficulté, c'était d'obtenir quand même quelque chose qui ressemble encore à du tissu, mais qui soit quand même assez rigide aussi. Donc là, j'ai fait des ceintures comme ça, on peut voir que c'est quand même un peu plus rigide. J'ai utilisé du crin de cheval qu'on peut trouver dans le commerce pour faire l'entoilage à l'intérieur. Donc, ça permet justement de les rigidifier un peu, mais ça reste quand même assez souple pour pouvoir être porté. Ensuite, aussi niveau conception, il y avait plusieurs contraintes. C'était difficile de faire quelque chose qui pouvait recouvrir tout le corps, parce que justement, on ne savait pas à l'avance non plus qui allait le porter. Donc, il fallait quelque chose qui puisse être porté par différentes personnes. Et puis, Ernesto était venu avec l'idée justement d'une ceinture. Et puis, donc là, on est arrivé avec ce concept-là d'une ceinture quand même assez large, parce qu'on avait besoin que le motif soit quand même puisse être vu à partir d'une certaine distance de la caméra, mais qu'il puisse, tu sais, qu'il y ait quand même aussi assez de détails pour que le logiciel puisse venir chercher des points de référence sur l'image qu'on obtenait à partir de ça. Pour la confection en tant que telle de la ceinture, c'est ça, moi j'ai fait plusieurs tests. On avait surtout la contrainte que ça ne devait pas être répétitif. Donc, quelque chose qui ait un aspect un peu aléatoire, pas trop, mais qui ne soit pas répétitif dans tous les sens, dans le fond. Autant sur la longueur, autant en rotation. Donc, il fallait choisir une image quand même qui comporte plusieurs éléments aussi, des gros contrastes. Donc, c'est peut-être pour ça que celle-là, la dernière que j'ai faite, elle fonctionne moins bien parce que j'ai voulu essayer de reproduire un petit peu plus l'aspect nébuleuse qu'on pouvait retrouver sur les images, mais ça fait en sorte qu'il y a beaucoup plus de flou. Par contre, ici, ça c'est celle-là que j'avais le plus travaillé pour l'aspect contraste, et puis là, celle-là est quand même plus réussie pour l'élément réalité augmentée. La façon dont j'ai procédé pour les fabriquer. Donc, j'ai utilisé quand même du gros fil de tissage. Actuellement, on appelle ça du 4-8, pour les gens qui connaissent. C'est du coton. Mon idée, c'était de les teindre avant de les tisser pour aller chercher un effet un peu de flou autour des dessins. Comme j'espérais que ça fasse un effet pixel à cause du gros fil, j'espérais aussi que les petits détails, les petits points se verraient quand même assez bien, même à une certaine distance, pour pouvoir donner des points de repère intéressants sur l'image. Et puis surtout, on avait souvent aussi des images qui étaient quand même avec des traits arrondis, ce que le logiciel n'aimait pas. Lui, il aimait mieux les traits droits, peu importe l'angle. Donc, j'espérais obtenir aussi un effet un petit peu plus rectifié, disons, dans mes images, en faisant ça. Donc, le processus est quand même assez long. Ça implique de préparer toutes les fils à l'avance, préparer aussi l'image à l'avance qui était préparée sur l'ordinateur, les couleurs réduites, obtenir justement un effet pixel qui correspond justement avec la densité et le dutage que j'ai pour mon tissu ici. Ensuite, c'est de disposer les fils sur mes imprimés pour que chaque fil corresponde, par exemple, à chacune des lignes que j'ai faites, que j'ai imprimées. Ensuite, c'est de faire la teinture. Comme c'est du coton, ça prend la teinture spéciale pour le coton. Ensuite, c'est d'y aller. Là, pour les couleurs, je me suis laissée un petit peu aller quand même. C'est sûr qu'on a la ceinture lunaire ici. On s'entend que la surface de la Lune n'est pas jaune, mais quand même, je trouvais ça plus joli. Donc, c'est mon choix personnel d'avoir fait ça comme ça. Ici, d'une certaine façon, ça a été la première que j'ai faite. Ça a été un peu plus facile pour plusieurs éléments. J'avais les cratères ici qui donnaient quand même des beaux éléments de contraste. J'ai utilisé juste 2 couleurs, donc du jaune, du noir, puis ensuite je peignais ça directement sur le fil pour obtenir cet effet-là. Donc autant dans les fils de chaîne que dans les fils de trame, que j'ai fait ça indépendamment. Et ensuite, je les ai réunis ensemble en les tissant. Le tissage en tant que tel, ça prend aussi un peu de temps parce que j'ai besoin de m'assurer que les motifs s'accordent dans les 2 sens quand je les tisse. Donc, il faut quand même y aller de façon assez continue et assez régulière aussi. Ça m'est arrivé souvent de redéfaire certaines sections de plusieurs pouces et de recommencer, parce que ça ne correspondait pas. Mais bon, ça fait partie d'une certaine façon du plaisir de la chose. Donc,
Pendant que tu fais une petite pause ici, il y a des personnes qui aimeraient ça, si tu es capable aussi d'expliquer un petit peu en anglais.
Ah, OK. I will try to explain you in English, but please excuse my accent. So, I had set some samples beforehand, so I had I had an idea about the warp and the weft count. So, and after that, I just dye the thread individually. On the picture, I printed, and after that, I wove it together. So I had to make sure that everything was corresponding correctly in the warp and weft. So I had to undo a few parts of it. And after that, it's the doublure. Lining, thank you. So the lining, it's quite simple. I had to, I use a ruler to make it straight when I press it with a steamer. And after that, I had to glue the horsehair, thank you, to the back side. And after that, I just sew it together with the lining. And it was, I did it by hand because I wanted to be sure that there was no thread showing on the front. Because it was important too that we had the black border all around the belt, so that the augmented reality software was behaving better with the border, the black border. So we kept it. And mostly I did the same for each one of them. So this is the sun one, and I'm very happy with how it turned out, because at first when I just dyed the thread, it was just a big blob of black. So I was like, oh no, I ruined it. But it was okay because it's cotton and it behaves differently than the wool. And the fractal one, it was quite an interesting thing to do, because I had to be quite precise with the placement of the dots, so as to not distract too much from the original pattern. And the last one, the ship and the nebulae, and so I was trying to be very precise, but like as you see, maybe this technique is not the best one to be precise, but I still like the effect and the way the colors blend together.
Thank you. Other questions for Dominique?
No, not so far.
Okay.
Thank you.
There was a musical too that you can pass an interview.
Yes,
Jocelyne, would you like to talk about music? No?
Would be fun.
Everybody wants to see one sure.
Is the chair strong enough?
Yeah. It puts up with me, so.
You never know. So
tell us who you are and
well,
what your background is.
I'm Spock from Vulcan. My blood is from Zinc. Well, I don't know. My name is Jocelyne and I worked on the sound environment. And first of all, I worked on the animation, like trying to build sound towards the animation, and then I realized it was not the right way to do that. But that gave me some clues about the dynamics of the whole system, and then I had the text, because the text came after that, and the text gave a different rhythm. They are like very. They have a specific rhythm in them, and they give clues with different personalities. So that helped me a lot to make some differentiation between all the little pieces of music, like to give some, like a character, like a living character in the music. And also, I wanted first to build some melodies that were very harmonic, like So I use some melodies that they were close to the medieval environment. However, they were not really fitting, what we wanted to, because it's about sci-fi, and so. What I did is I used the technique of madrigal, which is the way that you layer the music. And, with the madrigal, we have some modalities that induce some kind of feelings that you can have. But I didn't use that because the feeling were like too much. I used that for the sun, but I didn't use, the piece of music that we call the sun, and it was related to the bell sound. So I used this one for the bell sound, but I didn't use it for the other one because it was too, how could I say, like, you had just one feeling in one piece of music. So I didn't want to do that. For the rest of it, I use a technique more like a vertical way of written the music. And for me, the how could I say, the easiest one to build was the nebula, as it was like some kind of, I choose the sound depending upon the letters that are given, and they give me a chords that will spread, and then after that I just use the march.
Is arrêté?
Not stop.
Sorry, it stopped in the middle.
Okay, I'm not stopping.
It's still like 2 minutes ago, so you can...
Since I have the microphone, I'm going to keep
You were
it.
live on the streaming, but you weren't live on this camera.
And you're still live on the stream.
And you're getting really red.
It's my natural color. Well, what I was talking about, I use a lot of electronic sound. However, to give a little bit of warmness, like it was useful to use real instruments. At first, I tried to introduce sound from voices, but it didn't work, as all the environment are very, represent the space and the void. And when you use human voice, you put the people that are listening to your music, you put them
in the environment that are very too common to use that. So I prefer to use sound, but very high sound or very low sound. And I would say the text helped a lot to build the music because that really gives feelings. And I didn't pick up these feelings. I tried to introduce something else depending upon the feelings that were presented. Like, for example, the moon is all about, for me, like something like a dream, but also it presents a bit of, it's related to our psyche. It's related to what we can feel, and so for that I use some sounds that are very close to rhythm of valse, but not really using the valse, so to speak. So it's just like something that's swinging around, like, and for the part that I really struggled was a fractal, because the fractal means that they are very mathematic. So first of all, I say, I'm just going to use a fractal myself, and that will be okay. But it did not work. And in the text fractal, you have something very amazing in the dynamics, because it's like a play. It's like something, but it's not just children play. It's like more sarcastic. I mean, there is many things that coming up, and you cannot just use a fractal as it is. You have to.
Cold,
yeah, it's too cold, and also it's too obvious, so to speak. And these texts are so many layers of meaning that you cannot just put something like that. You had also to play your part. And for this one, I think I worked a lot on it, and I still have work to do, maybe. There is something that gave me a little bit of reassurance, because when you work on that, you feel really not reassured at all. It's the final, at the end, I decided to use a march, like a harmonic march, and it gave me confidence to build the rest. Because, like when you settle on something and you feel like you're grasping a part of the, the material things of the sound, it's fall in place. So I start by the end to build the rest of it, like to give me a little bit of confidence to build on it. And I would say I was not also completely okay to use harmonic sound, but I think that at the end it's we relate more to the sci-fi environment when we use real harmonic instruments than when it is only electronic sense. So it's the reason why I choose this, and I get inspiration from sound coming from medieval. I like very much Doland, and so like I get
But you use the whale song a lot in this.
Yes.
Too,
so this one is a public domain sound that is available for everyone online, and I use it, but I stretch it. I use sound synthesis to remove some of the noise that I didn't want to from certain parts, and I sometimes I add few layers of it and just keep, for example, the highest parts. So, but everyone can use this sound when you do a sound well, and it's on Wikipedia. So it's a very well-known sound that is open to everyone. And I use also a sound from the violin that is also some kind of a public domain, but this one, it just helped me to shape some few things, but at the end I didn't put it because it was too quick and too targeted to specific folklore. So it's a difficulty that you don't want to be trapped in other universe. You have to fit the universe of Geoffreyjen, and you want to build something that is not like Celtic folklore or something else. So this is was part of the difficulties, because you want people to relate to something they know and not to relate too much to be, get into something that is not related to what they're expecting. So, yeah, that's what I have to say.
Thank you very much. I learned a lot from that, actually.
Thanks to you.
Any other questions? For Jocelyne? Maybe we'll wind down the interviews. I'm sure people are tired, so.
Thank you for your words.
Alice, Jonathan, you do want to talk? No? Because the programming presented its challenges too. But
Yes, until yesterday.
Before I end the stream, do you want to say, do you want me
The
to
last
end
word?
the stream, or
You want to say last word to the
Sure,
stream?
let's
Yes.
finish up the
do
stream.
you want to say a couple
Yeah,
of last
sure.
words first?
Go back to my chair.
As you wish.
So we're going to finish up there, give people a chance to relax without it all being online. So we're going to stop the streaming there, and we may do this again at another time eventually. So and the streaming will be live. We'll stay up on the site for some time, so you'll be able to tell your friends about it and have other people come and look at it. And we're also producing some video clips. Short video clips that will be used to showcase the event as well. Alain, did you have something? No?
Good. I would like a finished word for the clips, and you talk to this camera.
Okay.
Here.
Well, what am I going to say to finish? I hope you enjoyed yourself, and we'll see you another time when we do this again.
It's perfect.